This is the first workshop that we are going to have as a part of the GST team in order to support potential applicants to prepare concept notes for the call for proposal that's been published recently. There was a series of info sessions held as well. I guess some of you also participated at the info sessions. Any questions regarding the rules, regulations, requirements, and so on? I would like to just mention that GST team is a project working for the European Union in Cyprus, of course, but if you want any official opinion of the contracting authority, if you have any dilemmas in regards to guidelines for applicants, especially eligibility criteria and so on, it would probably be the best for you to actually send the question to the contracting authority and receive an answer through the official procedure that has been explained at the info sessions, but I can mention it again. You're sending questions to the contracting authority, and then they compile all the questions and they publish questions and answers document. It needs to be published at least 21 days before the end of the call. So this is why it's important for you to, if you're interested in receiving an answer to any of the questions asked, to visit the website of Europaid, where these questions and answers will be published. We will present the link later on during the presentation. There is plenty of time left for the preparation of your concept notes, but still time flies in a way also. So also please use these workshops to gain as much as knowledge possible and to ask any questions that you may have, so that you prepare your concept notes in the best way that's possible. Agenda has been presented to you, I believe, in advance, but I will just mention it again. This is a 2-day workshop. Today we will have, let's say, 4 sessions. We will have a break around 12, and we should cover first 3 sessions before the break. First session is about the call for proposals. We will briefly go through the requirements, criteria, eligibility criteria, partnership criteria, application process. Once again, I mean, this is very much similar to the info sessions, but another opportunity for you to understand the criteria applicable to this call. The following session is about result-based management. We will briefly touch upon the log frame approach, which is one of the basic approaches that the European Commission uses in development aid, and a useful tool for you to be aware of, because you will be preparing not full log frames now in this stage of the application process, but still you're expected to present results in your concept notes, and it's very important to have these results logically organized in terms of the intervention logic under your actions. So this is the session number 2. And then session number 3 has several topics. As you can see, it's about stakeholder involvement, partnership, target groups, final beneficiaries, and sustainability. And then after the break, we will have a session dedicated to budgeting. Now, at this stage of the application process, you are not requested to submit full budget, but you still need to have a good estimate of your budget, which you will be presenting just nominally in terms of the amount in your concept notes. We will continue tomorrow as well. As I said, it's a 2-day workshop, and there will be 4 sessions again tomorrow. Plenty of time also for you to ask questions. We will have a question and answer session at the end of day 1 and also at the end of day 2. But as I said during the presentations, if anything is not clear to you, if you have any particular questions, you can always address us, and you can either write questions, or at the end of sessions we will have brief times, I suppose, also to discuss whatever is perhaps not clear to you or needs to be explained in a different way or with more detail. Today with me from the GST team, there are also two of my colleagues, Chidem and Nilay. At the end of the day too, they will be presenting the session on PADOR and Prospect, important issues for you because you'll be submitting your projects through PADOR and Prospect. I mean, through Prospect, but you also need to be registered in this PADOR. So it's important for you to understand how this works, how you can actually register in these databases, and what in technical terms needs to happen for you to successfully, in technical terms, submit a concept note. So that's the agenda. Important note for the very beginning, please read all the documents very carefully. Please study the guidelines for applicants, the templates. Most of these documents are written in a very bureaucratic language. I know this, it is as it is, but then again, they also include a lot of notes, a lot of instructions. In a way, concept note formats are self-explanatory. They really lead you, I mean, through instructions as to what needs to be presented there and written there. So please read all the documents carefully, because based on our experiences, most concept notes that do not pass these thresholds of a certain number of points during the assessment or because of some administrative issues, do so because they were not following the criteria of the guidelines carefully, and perhaps the instructions or the submission templates as well. So in terms of the call for proposals, I presume you are familiarized with it, at least partially. The call was published in July this year. Your deadline to submit concept notes, it's October, 16th October this year, 16 hours Cyprus time. So please make sure that you do not submit your concept note at 15 minutes past 4. You're submitting your concept notes through a Prospect database. As I mentioned, you will be presented later on tomorrow with the details of this database, how does the registration work, and so on and so forth. There is an exceptional possibility that you deliver your concept notes also through post, or with hand delivery. But this is really only in exceptional cases if justified. So we always recommend to use this Prospect. It's really not so complicated. You are not completing the document online, but you are only actually uploading it. So, I mean, it doesn't require a lot of time spent on the internet and so on and so forth. It should be simple, even though, of course, there are some issues that need to be taken into account. In case of any questions that you could have, perhaps as to whether you're eligible to apply, whether these or those activities should be included in your concept notes, budgetary issues, financial issues, any other possible issue or question that you could have and you would like to receive an official opinion of the contracting authority, these questions should be sent by email by 25th September 2020, and as I mentioned briefly earlier, also replies will be given by 6th October 2020 in a form of a question and answers document. So any questions you may have, please submit them to the contracting authority. We will briefly go through the document, the guidelines for applicants, just for you to perhaps look at it if you were not familiarized with it before, and there is an email there that you can use when asking and submitting questions. I would also like to mention that this is a call which has a two-phase submission process. Sometimes European Commission decides to have only one phase when it comes to grant schemes, and then you're asked to submit concept notes and full application forms and budgets and log frames all at once. But this is not the case now. In this case, the submission starts with the submission of the concept note document. It's a 5-page document. It's a 5-page document that you saw in the agenda, tomorrow we have a full session dedicated to this template. And it shouldn't be so difficult to complete it. For most of the potential applicants who were previously not involved in European Commission grants and European Union funding, it may seem a bit demanding and challenging, but at the end of the day, it's a 5-page document that's completed and submitted. The process then further goes as explained on this slide. I hope that everyone can see the presentation well. So once your concept notes are submitted, they are administratively verified. It could be possible that the Commission requests some clarifications in terms of the administrative check, but those are just easy letters that you may receive asking you to clarify a certain issue. But then once these administrative verifications are completed, your concept notes will be evaluated. Evaluation process is also explained in the guidelines for applicants. We will have a small session also during this workshop explaining how is this evaluation done, what does it mean, what do evaluators look into. These are important issues for you to understand and to be aware of, so that you ensure that your concept notes are evaluated with the highest possible score. Following the scoring, following the evaluation of the concept notes, if your concept note passes into the following phase, then you will be asked to submit a full application, which means that you will be asked to submit a much more detailed document explaining all your activities, action plan, all the risks, details of the target group, details on issues such as sustainability and furthermore, and also full budget with all budget lines and a log frame matrix fully explaining your intervention logic. The minimum number of points is defined for the evaluation of concept notes. So this is also important for you to understand. If the concept notes are not scored up to this minimum, I mean, you will certainly not be invited to submit to be asked to submit full application form. Then these full application forms are again evaluated against the criteria that are again also explained in the guidelines for applicants. And in case this is successful, in case your full application forms are fulfilling the criteria and scored sufficiently to obtain funds to be awarded a project. The projects are going through the so-called eligibility check, where the eligibility of applicants, activities is checked, and also administrative documents such as statutes, financial identification forms, and so on and so forth. And then following this process, there may be some discussions with the contracting authority as to your proposed budgets, if some funds need to perhaps be cleared, or if something's not presented well enough in the budget templates. And following these budget revisions, a contract then is awarded and signed. The process is rather complex, and in all grant schemes that the European Union is funding, it takes a while for the applications to be evaluated. So this is the reason why there is a timetable also published in the guidelines, which gives you an indicative idea as to when your projects could start. So don't think that this is going to be finalized in a month or two. For certain, the evaluation process is going to last at least for 12 months, if not even more, based on previous experiences. But this is important for you to understand this overall process, even though it perhaps looks a little bit complex, and you'll become interested in what happens with full application forms and so on once you're invited. But it's important for you to understand that you should plan your projects with this in view, that your projects, your actions are supposed to start as from the date which is explained in the guidelines as the indicative date for the start of the actions. This call for proposal has some specific details that were presented at the info sessions, but I will present them once again. There are two lots, there are two segments, there are two lots that you can apply for. It's possible to submit one application for lot 1 and then also another application for lot 2. I mean, one and the same organization to submit it. But if you decide, if you opt for this possibility, please be aware that eventually only one grant contract will be awarded. So it's not possible that both projects will be awarded if you submit one application for lot 1 and then one application for lot 2. Lot 1 offers smaller size grants and the duration of the action there, the possible, maximum duration of your grant actions is shorter. And then lot 2 allows for higher budgets and longer duration. When studying the guidelines for applicants, you will see that these guidelines for applicants specifically define the overall objective and specific objectives of this call. They are set in the guidelines, so please be familiarized with them. This is important because you're always asked to present how your project relates to these call for proposals objectives, how relevant it is for this call, and then of course you have to be familiar with the objectives of the call in order to be able to explain the relevance of your proposal. There are certain priorities that are set in the guidelines for applicants, so it's important for you as well, I think, to familiarize yourself with them, to understand that each proposed action must include as a minimum one priority and then another one which is listed as mandatory priority in the guidelines for applicants. And then also perhaps something specific for this call is the fact that it also defines a list of added values. So in the guidelines for applicants, you'll be able to read these added values and try to include them in your proposal, because proposals will be evaluated against them as well. An important note also to make, there is a list of ineligible actions, some actions that you should not be proposing for this call, so it's important to also be aware of that. These are the three links that I wanted to present to you, which lead you to the documentation, to the call for proposal in itself, to all the documents. We will open the one which is related to European Commission. Sorry. Once you go to this link, you will see a lot of documents. Please don't be afraid of the magnitude of these documents. Not all of them are to be completed by potential applicants in this stage. The most important document to read and understand and follow through are guidelines for applicants. I mentioned like for 20 times already this expression. We will briefly open them just for you to understand how the document looks like. I am sure that lots of you had already seen the document and that you're familiar with it, but just perhaps for those organizations that are not. This is a generic template that the European Commission uses when they fund development aid through grant schemes, nothing really specific for this particular call in terms of the template. So for you also to know in the future, if the European Commission publishes something similar to this call and you may be interested to apply as a civil society organization, the template will be more or less the same. There's some background information explaining why this call is published and what are the EU objectives in the area of civil society. And then, as I mentioned, very important part of the document for you, objectives of the program and priority issues. So please read this global objective, which would be the overall objective of the call, and the specific objectives as well. And while preparing your concept notes, make a reference to them, explaining, okay, my project is relevant for this particular call because it responds to the specific objective of the call by this and that way, because this will be for certainly assessed during the evaluation process. Then there is a list of priorities set, as you can see here, and as we mentioned, there is one mandatory priority for all actions and then optional priorities for all actions: environment and climate change, human rights, good governance, social inclusion and youth, media. The minimum number of priorities that you need to address is 2. So it means that as a minimum, you have to address in your concept notes this mandatory society capacity building priority issue, and then you may choose one from this optional list. I would also like to, in the very beginning, advise you, this is my personal advice, it's not official, but I would like to advise you not to plan for projects that are like, beyond any kind of like human grasp and grasping all these possible priorities, thinking that, okay, my project could be, score the best if I actually address environment, human rights, good governance, social inclusion, and media literacy, because it's not really possible to have all these priorities addressed in one particular project. And it doesn't really mean that if you only formally mention all these priorities that your concept notes will be scored higher. You actually have to meaningfully address the priorities that are listed here. And then added value elements, also important to read and understand, because this is going to be evaluated as well. You see even that there is an instruction here referring you to the evaluation grid, where this question is particularly taken into. There is a definition of target groups and final beneficiaries also in the document, and then financial details and so on and so forth. I'm not intending to present this document to you, in its entirety and go through page by page, but just to make sure that you understand where to find this document and to make sure that you go through it, that you go through all the criteria that are mentioned here. Read also the footnotes, because sometimes very important information is presented there. And in case of any dilemma, you have the possibility to ask. So send question and ask, contracting authority to clarify whatever is not clear to you. There are also Turkish versions of all the documents, which you can find on Grant Support Team website. And also there is a Facebook link here, which you can use, which can also lead you to the call for proposal documents that are also printed in Turkish. Of course, concept notes are prepared in English and they're submitted in English, but we just wanted to make sure that it's more inclusive and that people who perhaps would like to also have Turkish versions of the documents may have them. As I said, please don't get confused, afraid, and decide not to apply when you see this complex list of documents published. It's usually like that. There are some documents there that are just for your information, like a template for the contract or reporting annexes. They're published there as a part of the call, but as templates, they'll be used at a much later stage when grants start their operation. For the time being, what's important for you is to read guidelines for applicants and also so-called Annex A1. We will also just go to it again. This is this Annex A1, which you can see here. This is the template for the concept notes. You can, of course, read all other documentation that is presented here, become, like familiar with it, and so on and so forth. But for the time being, the first two documents are the most important documents for you. Eligibility criteria. Who can apply for this call? This is a call that is a bit different, I would have to say. I'm working, cooperating with the Commission on a number of different grant schemes, not only those that relate to Cyprus, but others. But it also allows for the possibility for persons without legal entity and natural persons to apply for grants, which is not that usual. And it's a good news. It's good news because it's more inclusive and it opens up for, like giving opportunities also to perhaps civil society organizations that are not legally registered to also apply and seek funding. And then organizations, they need to be non-profit and established in northern part of Cyprus. These are the requirements for the lead applicants. Unlike some other calls that took place in the past in northern part of Cyprus, partnership between like at least two civil society organizations or something similar is not an obligation currently. So this is also for you important to know. You don't need to have an organization or like a CSO which doesn't have a legal entity, a legal personality partnering with you. Of course, I mean, if the project seeks that partnership and if it is meaningful, you should form it, but it's not mandatory. And if you decide to actually apply in partnership, co-applicants, they also have to satisfy all the same criteria as lead applicants. Let's go back to the previous slides. It means that they need to be non-profit, they need to be CSOs, but then again, they also can be established outside of northern part of Cyprus, meaning EU countries, IPA countries, European Economic Area countries, etc. Guidelines for applicants, they present the list, indicative list of activities that may be proposed and indicative list of actions. Also for you not to be perhaps confused, sometimes Commission uses the term actions and they're talking about projects. So whenever you see in the guidelines, when you see grant action, it actually means grant project. It's just a small matter that sometimes can be confusing. But this list that is presented in the guidelines, we can perhaps also again open the guidelines for applicants so that you see what I'm talking about. It's not exhaustive, it's just an illustration of what the donor expects to see from the proposals that will be submitted, but it doesn't mean that these are the only actions that can be submitted. You can see here on page 13 types of action, and then it explains what types of actions, what types of projects could be submitted, and then what activities within these projects could be proposed. But as I said, the list is exhaustive. It's a bit like you can regard it as an inspiration for you to understand what may be proposed, but please, you don't need to use this wording. And also, if you have an idea, if you want to include some other activities that are not necessarily listed here, that's okay, that's allowed. This list is not exhaustive list. There is a possibility in lot 2 of this call to propose subgranting. What does it mean? It means that you may have an idea perhaps to act as a mini contracting authority to other parties. You would like perhaps to fund some smaller scale projects yourself through a call for proposal. You see now, the Commission has published this call for proposal and they're asking you to submit certain grant proposals and they will award grants. Subgranting means that you do the same more or less in a smaller scale, that you also organize a call for proposal and then perhaps natural persons or CSOs, they also submit their applications to you, and then you award so-called financial support to third parties to them. If organizations are interested in doing this, it's also important to mention that maximum amount of sub-grant is €10,000 per party. When I say per party, it means per a sub-grantee, and then €60,000 in total within your total budget. Sub-granting may be an interesting option for organizations who would like to support less developed CSOs and their capacities, especially in maybe perhaps rural areas or distant areas, isolated areas, or if there are organizations who would like to make them and focus and make an emphasis perhaps on a certain topic and support less developed CSOs working in a certain sector, or just recently registered CSOs perhaps, or something similar to that. So it's an interesting option which may maximize the impact of your grants. And I know that it sounds a little bit bureaucratic and people are sometimes afraid of this sub-granting because it seems to them, oh, this is a lot of documents involved, it's selecting, there are financial risks and so on and so forth. But the call for proposal, as I mentioned, offers for this possibility, so you could consider it and you could also consider proposing it. So these are the fundamental details, so to speak, of this particular call for proposals, just reminding you once again on them. I wanted to check with you, if possible, if you have any questions regarding the specific criteria of the call. Had you maybe started already working on your concept notes? How does this look like? And I mean, have you perhaps finalized some concept notes and already submitted them by now?
I have a question.
Okay.
Thank you for a nice presentation. Just maybe you have mentioned it, but I may have missed it, about the timeline. So when we are doing our concept notes, how long would it take for the evaluation, to write the concept notes? And when we do the concept notes, what timeline should we propose? Like, because, if we go through the concept note, we will submit the full proposal, and you said that will take a while. So when we are writing the proposal, what kind of, how should we, pay attention to this issue, the timeline issue? That's what I wanted to know. Thank you. This is Ayşe Ülgen. Okay, thanks.
You're welcome, no problem. You will see again, I opened this guidelines document that I'm referring to, I'm like boring you with this. Once again, but there is an indicative timetable here. That's indicative, just take into account it's indicative, it's not a rule, it can be even, like different in the reality, but it says that the earliest you can expect the contract signature is June 2021. So you can see all the deadlines here, basically. Deadline for requesting clarifications, we already mentioned this, then deadline for submitting concept notes, we mentioned this as well. Earliest you can expect information regarding administrative checks and concept note evaluation is beginning of December this year. And then you may be invited to submit full application forms. Deadline will be likely January 2021, April 2021, earliest you can expect information regarding the evaluation of your full application forms, and then April 21 notification of a contract award, and then we're into June 2021. So this is you know, like the best scenario based on experience. It can only be longer. It will not be earlier than any of these dates here. So we're talking about June 2021.
Thank you very much.
I wrote a question in the chat, but I think you didn't see it.
No, I didn't, because I didn't open the chat yet, but now I will. Can grants be given to members of potential members of CSOs? You will maybe have to explain this. I mean, the person who wrote the question, you will have to explain this a little bit to me. What do you mean by members of potential members of CSOs?
Yes, hi, I'm Neil. I'm asking the question on behalf of different CSOs, not just one. So you were mentioning that the third-party grants can be given to, let's say, CSOs that are newly established or in remote or disadvantaged areas or stuff like that. What if we want to do a scheme for our members? Let's say it's a chamber, and the chamber wants to run a program that will increase the capacity of their members on a certain area. And in order to support this, they would like to give third-party grants to the people that meet the criteria in order to be able to financially support them to meet, to increase their capacity, let's say. It can be a certificate that they will achieve. It can be a certain standard that we put that they need to spend some money to achieve, or it can be just a sort of a reward contract that they've reached the certain goals that they have to achieve.
Yeah, you will see in the guidelines, again, I'm referring you to. You can hear me. Okay. Sometimes I forget that I'm muted or I'm not. You will see that there is a little bit explanation as to, you know, like what is this sub-granting about, what it could be about, what activities can be proposed, and so on and so forth. So you will see here the third parties eligible for financial support should be, it says civil society activists or CSOs as defined in under section 1, 2 above, you know. So of course, I'm not allowed to give you any definite answer as to yes or no. There may be some issues, and if you know, you're lucky enough to get funds for this project, there may be even issue during the implementation. But I would say, based on the wording of these guidelines, which say that civil society activists are eligible as third parties, I don't see why they wouldn't be eligible, you know. In your project. So just please make sure, if you're considering this financial support to third parties, that you clearly explain in your concept notes all these details.
Yes.
The guidelines, they are saying that you have to explain this in Annex A2, you know, but Annex A2, this is full application form, and it's better for you, if you're proposing financial support to third parties, it's better for you also to use a little bit of space in concept notes as well to explain your plans and your expected outcomes of this financial support to third parties, also in the concept notes. Now let me see if I can find other chat questions. For sub-granting, is that a benefit to our concept? No, not necessarily. If it is not meaningful, you know, please don't understand anything that I presented today as advocating for sub-granting in your projects. You don't all have to present and propose this in your projects. But if this is meaningful, if outcomes are strong, if there is going to be some effect of this sub-granting, it should be considered. Based on my experience, organizations in northern part of Cyprus are a little bit afraid about this sub-granting, so we don't see this a lot in the proposals. But it's nothing really that's like going to lead you to the success only. And if you don't feel that it has any meaningful relevance to whatever you're planning under your project, you're not asked to plan it or present it just because it's mentioned somewhere in the guidelines. I think that I already answered the question number 3. Are there perhaps any other questions? We have maybe around like 10 minutes more for this particular session. I would like to hear if you maybe started working on your concept notes already. How does it look like? Is it complicated? No, no questions. Okay. If there are no questions, then I would like to propose maybe to take like a 5-minute break, if that's okay with people, and then we'll continue with session number 2. In the meantime, I will upload the guidelines for applicants document in the chat as well, so that I'm certain that people are already familiar with this document, but if there is anyone who hasn't seen the document already, just for you to also have a copy, and then you can download it also. I hope that this will work. And then we'll be back in 5 minutes to continue with the presentation. When we speak of result-based management, and when we speak of results, we speak of the 3 levels of results that you will be asked to present in your concept notes as a certain like a result chain. It's impact, outcome, and output level, and I will try to explain what this is about during this session. What's important to understand is also that result-based management is not only about managing results, it's also about certain different issues that are presented on this slide here as well, like identifying and managing risks, monitoring progress, increasing knowledge, reporting on results achieved, defining expected results, realistic expected results, target group, and final beneficiaries. So you will see that in your concept notes, once you start working on them, the instructions are telling you to be, as clear as possible. What do you want to achieve in terms of activities plan, in terms of output, in terms of outcome change for your target groups? What is your target group? Sometimes they're using words like quantify as much as possible, and so on and so forth. So
Alexandra,
yeah.
I'm really sorry, we can't see any presentation on our screens.
Okay, maybe then something went wrong. I'll try again. Is it working now?
Yes,
Oh,
thank
okay.
you.
Yeah, so you will see, just let's see the previous slide as well. Anyways, I will upload the presentation as well. So you have the PowerPoint presentation also available at the end of the day. But you will see in the concept notes that what they're asking you to do is to present these results that you want to achieve, and these are the 3 levels of the results that I also mentioned just briefly earlier. So-called result chain. So please be aware of these expressions, if nothing else. There is impact on the overall level, there are outcomes, outputs, activities, and inputs. And it's expected that in your grant proposals, there will be an intervention logic which logically explains how activities that you're proposing, what outputs do they produce, and how these outputs, products, services delivered make a certain outcome change on your target groups, if nothing else. So when you're presenting these results, ensure that there is a logical link between all these levels. Otherwise, there may be your project, even though it could be the best planned project, and it could be the project that promises a lot, may be perceived as not being coherent enough, may be perceived as something that doesn't really logically structure, doesn't really have an internal logical structure that speaks of its coherence. The result chain is something that's usually presented in logical frameworks, and you can see the visual presentation of these logical frameworks on this particular website, where you know, your project's presenting certain number of activities, and then these activities are lead to certain number of outputs, and then these outputs lead to certain number of outcome changes, and then this is all a contribution to an overall impact, which is something that is beyond your full project control, but it is a contribution that your project makes. So this logical framework is something that you will be asked to present when submitting full application forms, and you're not obliged to actually do this now. But then again, you have to be aware of your result chain because this is something that you present in the design of the action. So on this particular slide, I presented one, I hope, simple result chain example that could perhaps give you a little bit more information as to what all these terms are, because sometimes they are, you know, impact, outcome, outputs, and then they're changed in the meantime. It used to be overall objective, now it's impact, and so on. So people sometimes, you know, have problems understanding what these words are all about. But you can see on this particular slide what is this impact and what are these outcomes and what are these outputs. On a particular project, which for example dealt with youth, so on the level of output, this project planned for some youth technical skills to be improved, for their social skills to be improved, and then for companies accessing subsidies to engage youths as interns. So these were the outputs expected, and it was meant to lead to an outcome which is increased employment of youths in the city, region, or you know, unspecified. It's always recommended that in your result chain you try to have one overall objective, not more than 3 specific objectives, and then the number of outputs as required, because otherwise it gets complicated and difficult for evaluators also to understand your intentions. Results, and when we say results, we mean impact, outcome, outputs, should be defined in a SMART fashion, as they say, which is an abbreviation for these words which are presented on this slide: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. So when you're defining your results, try to have the measurable, achievable, of course, within your project. They should relate to your project, not to something else, relevant for your action and for the changes you want to introduce, and then time-bound. They should be produced within the project lifetime, especially when it comes to outputs and when it comes to outcome. You know, increased employment of youth in the city region, for example, on this particular project needs to happen within the project lifetime, and then there will be an indicator speaking as to what is the measure of this change that's intended. This slide just gives you another explanation of what this SMART means. Measurable, when we say measurable, we say with numbers. When we say result-oriented, tied to goals, have an endpoint. So you can always plan in your results also to say that something will be achieved by the end of year 1 of the project, or by month 6 or something like that, so that it is clear that you have a clear plan as to how these results can be achieved. As an example, I prepared to you and I wanted to present to you one logical framework for you to perhaps understand a little bit as to what I'm talking about. Again, mentioning for the time being, in your concept note, you're not submitting this format now. This is something that you'll be asked to submit only if you pass concept note evaluation, but you will be asked anyway in your concept notes to present this first row, the result chain, your outputs, outcomes, and overall objectives. So if possible, it would be the best if you can, alongside development of the concept note, also develop the log frame for your project, even at this stage. I know that it could be, like tiresome and require some resources, but then again, at the end of the day, you'll already be prepared for the full application form stage, and you'll be clear as to whether your results are actually smart and whether your results do make sense in terms of the logic. So you will see on this particular log frame, this is a project that deals with new jobs. It's simple. This is why I wanted to present it, because it speaks about increasing quality of the labor force in a certain sector of the economy. But then again, it's simple as to explaining as to what this project wants to achieve. You will see that as the indicator for the impact, this particular project opted to present the percentage of training participants that continue working in this field after the project ends. So it's really like project related, simple to measure, numbers are clear, and so on and so forth. This particular project opted to present 2 outcome changes for their target groups. One was related to the education that was planned under the project, and the other one was related to development of social skills for the participants under the project. They opted to use numbers of participants trained as indicators for the outcome change, which is easy to measure. For an evaluator trying to understand a certain project, log frames like this are easy to follow. It's clear, okay, these people, they want to train 50 people in social skills, train 45 people in some job-specific trainings. They also plan for a certain sustainability, because on the impact level, they're saying that at least 25% of project participants will continue working. So it's an example of a simple log frame. And then on output level, they also related to these 2 outcomes, and then they just followed the logic of the project as to what would be the number of people interested in a certain training, what would be the number of selected candidates, and so on and so forth. So as I said, I mean, even though it's not really required of you, even though it's not really something that you need to submit now, apart from the fact that you're submitting, that you need to present this result chain in your concept notes, it would be an advice to try to develop this log frame matrix for your project even now. You don't have to go into details, present the costs and so on and so forth, but at least to be able to present to yourself the results and the indicators and the targets under your project, so that it is clear for you what you want to achieve. I will also try, yeah, someone wanted maybe to ask.
Yes, please. Would you be able to upload this file as well?
Yeah, this is what I wanted to say now. I will
Thank
try
you.
to upload this file as well as another log frame which I prepared to present. It's just, for some reason, I cannot open this chat now, but I will hopefully do it later. And then another log frame I wanted to present to you is a little bit more complex, because it has to also be said, in all honesty, I mean, this log frame is a reflection of the sector that these people are working on. They're working in employment sector. They want to employ a certain number of people, so perhaps it's easier for them, to be able to present this intervention logic in such a simple manner and understandable manner. at least simple and understandable in my opinion. But then another log frame which I prepared to you to have a look is relates to child rights. So you will see that this for example is a project which dealt with elimination of child violence against children, sorry. So you will see that it's a bit more complex. These people decided to be a little bit more narrative in explaining what they want to do and so on and so forth. So they have much more, you know, outputs, and then also activities are presented in a different way. They opted to have components within their project and then certain activities. But again, it provides a little bit of clarity as well, because once you go and you study this particular log frame, you will see that outputs are clear. They're saying we want to produce one mapping report, one training program will be done, 20 professionals will be trained, and then all this will lead to capacity development of certain professionals working in social welfare sector. And an interesting aspect of the way that they wanted to present and indicate and measure their change is actually presented on the impact level. You will be given these documents, so you'll have an opportunity to study and read them, but they're actually proposing some statistical analysis, administration of some instruments to understand the outcome change for their target group. In this particular case, this target group are professionals working in child protection services and parents. So, as I said, a little bit more complex, but then again, simplified to the point that whomever is reading this project is not lost. They understand what these people want to do, and they manage to organize it neatly so that you can follow through all the activities and understand how activities contribute to the outputs and how outputs contribute to the outcome change. In my personal opinion, outcome change is the most important part of your result chain, because it should relate to the changes that are to happen within the target group of your project. And in some way, these people, according to my opinion, have managed to present how this change is going to take place and why their activities and their outputs are important. Yeah, so as I said, I will try to upload both of these documents on using chat. In the meantime, if there are any questions, please ask them. Is it possible for you to see these documents now in chat?
Not really.
I try once again, I don't know. For some reason it says network disconnected, but then it's not disconnected. Okay, I don't know, something's happening, but I will try at a later stage. As I said, in my opinion, I mean, for sure you will receive even via emails if this uploading of the documents for whatever reason doesn't work, you will receive via emails all these handouts and the PowerPoint presentation anyway. So just again, once to mention, perhaps I mentioned this already, I don't want to be, boring you, but you're not required to submit these log frames now, which I just presented to you, but not a bad idea to develop them while you're preparing your concept notes. You will be asked to present only this part of your log frames, so your overall objective, specific objective and outputs. But then again, it's sometimes better to prepare log frames even now, all the indicators in place, assumptions, risks as well, so that you have a clear picture. You perhaps change something if need be in terms between the concept notes and full application forms and so on. And then you're ready to present the intervention logic of your projects even at the stage of the concept notes. If you're having problems as to identify outcomes, because it's easy to present activities, it's easy to present outputs. There are some services that are produced, there are some products that are produced as a result of your activities, but in terms of the outcomes, sometimes it's difficult to define them in this intervention logic of your project. And on this particular slide, you can maybe find some inspiration as to explaining on which levels can actually outcomes occur on community, population, group, organization, systems, individual level, families, and so on and so forth. And on the next slide, you will also see types of outcomes presented to you, which you can use as an inspiration while preparing your intervention logics for your projects and for your concept notes. If we go back to log frames, you will also see that at the end in the last column of log frames, there is also a column where you present assumptions. And when we go through the details of the concept note template, you will also see that you're asked there to present risks and assumptions that are related to your project, and that therefore it's important to understand what are these risks and what are these assumptions. And you can perhaps do this while studying the two examples of the log frame which I just presented to you. I mean, in this particular case, you will see that an assumption that is presented by this particular organization, they're saying willingness of employers to employ trained candidates for job positions. Okay, so this is a factor that needs to be in place so that my results are achieved. These are assumptions, because I mean, if these people are educated and their social skills well developed, still if there are no employers who are willing to employ trained candidates, we will not be able to actually achieve impact. So assumptions and risks are also something that you are asked to present in your concept notes. And then another reason, even more so, to have a log frame developed, because it logically gives you a reflection of these assumptions and risks in a structured way, so to speak. Or if we go back to the second example, you will see that this particular project also mentioned a lot of assumptions, like this intervention logic holds if these assumptions are in place, and then they mentioned that there will be no institutional change to affect proper implementation of the project, that there will be active involvement of stakeholders, and so on. And of course, we're not saying that sorry, that you are to use this way of presentation of the logical framework or this wording of the logical framework in your project while you're planning them? Absolutely not, of course, but these examples are given to you because we're aware that it's sometimes really difficult for the organizations to develop these work frames, and that they struggle sometimes with presenting, their intervention logic. So don't feel that this is an instruction; it has to be presented like this. Such and such wording needs to be used, but just use it as an inspiration for the development of your log frames. So for the end of this particular session, I thought that we maybe do a brief test, even though we're not in school. But I wanted to ask you if you could, using chat again, just let me know the answers to these 3 questions asked. So the first question is, what is result chain consisted of? And then the next question is implementation of a training an output or an outcome? And then the third question is knowledge change an output or an outcome? And you can use chat option to provide your answers to these 3 brief questions. For a minute, I think that we lost connection. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you and see. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, let's see the answers in chat. I saw that one person answered question number 3, and then someone said that I cannot see the questions. Can you see them now?
Yes, thank you.
I wanted to check with you. I mean, just to ask you, do you have any questions in terms of this definition of result chain? And some people mentioned that they already started working on their concept notes. So is it difficult for you to define these levels of results? Do you have any dilemmas there? Anything to discuss? Very good. I saw that your answers are correct, so this is very good. As I said, I mean, if you have any questions, this can be difficult sometimes, and if you have any questions or dilemmas when defining the intervention logic and understanding these levels of overall objectives and outcomes and outputs, please, ask. Good. We will now move into session 3. Session 3 is one of those sessions where there are, plenty of topics to be covered. All equally important, to be honest with you. Stakeholder involvement, partnerships, final beneficiaries and target groups, and then also there is a little bit, there are some slides that are dedicated to sustainability as well. You will see when tomorrow we go in detail through the concept notes templates that you're asked to present stakeholder analysis. You're not in particularly asked to analyze each and every stakeholder of your action, but you're asked to present the context of your project and therefore also the stakeholders that are involved there. And sometimes organizations, I'm speaking based on experience, and they're sending projects, they're so involved in their operations and activities that they really sometimes take things for granted, and then sometimes they don't really present the institutional context under which they work and what institutions and what organizations are there that are going to be impacted by the actions or activities proposed. So please also, take a moment to analyze your stakeholders while presenting and preparing your concept notes. You can do this in numerous ways. I mean, just browsing through internet, it will give you lots of information on how to do stakeholder analysis. And within GST, we also prepared longer time ago a certain manual on how to prepare projects, and there is a template to do stakeholder analysis there as well. But regardless of this, I mean, this particular slide gives you also a kind of a template that you can use when you're doing your stakeholder analysis. The point is not what template to use, but the point is that you should list all the organizations belonging to whatever sector that you expect to be impacted by your projects and your actions. And please don't forget that the representatives of your target groups are also stakeholders of the action, and try to make an effort to understand what their attitude towards your activities that you're proposing is, and what actions you need to take in order to engage them, consult them, or perhaps collaborate with them within your project. Because very often it happens that there are really good project proposals, but then presented as in isolation, like civil society organizations doing things only for themselves and not really involving perhaps other civil society organizations or other institutions. So this is why I wanted to, on this particular slide, present to you a kind of like, a circle where presenting who these stakeholders may be that you should look into, and whose interests and involvement you should plan or propose within your grant actions. Regulators, providers, resource owners, strategic partners, donors, interest groups, NGOs, press, media, important sometimes, but not really very much analyzed when it comes to concept notes that are proposed by CSOs. So just have this in mind when you're preparing your concept notes and think about all these organizations that could have an influence and that could be influenced by your project, and not only organizations but also groups, and try to see how they may be involved in your grant actions and what mechanisms you perhaps could plan to actually involve them stronger. They say sometimes in this stakeholder involvement, theories and manuals, that people will only respond if they are engaged. So it's similar to this thing that we are doing. For example, now you've seen a certain call for proposal published, and now you're taking certain actions to understand how to submit a concept note to this particular call for proposal. And I am presenting this to you, and then I'm asking you every now and then to, do you have any questions? I mean, how does this affect you? Is this clear to you? Because if I was presenting without asking you all these questions, I wouldn't have a feeling of you being involved in all this process. So in this very, very simple and very minimal level, you can see how involvement and engagement of people is important. And then on projects level is much more important. Important as well to analyze stakeholders. Why? Because there may be certain risks associated with stakeholders on projects, opportunities of course as well. But for example, there may be some organizations that may be opposing your project ideas. There may be some practices within these organizations or these groups that you may be challenging by your projects as well. And then this also needs to be analyzed and mentioned through proper risk analysis, but then also managed through certain involvement of these stakeholders within your projects. So when it comes to stakeholders, I also wanted, and then I prepared this slide because of that, to discuss certain practices among the CSOs. Sometimes these three practices are presented on this particular slide. I'm not going to read through them, but I guess the point of this slide is to say that sometimes in the civil society sector and in other sectors as well, activities are happening on a routine way, and because of lack of funds or because of lack of organizational structures that are looking into this, we forget to ask our stakeholders how they feel about what we are doing. Sometimes we forget to ask our beneficiaries how they feel about what we're doing, or we forget to analyze the outcomes of our work for our beneficiaries. And I guess this is important also when it comes to project planning, that you don't only plan activities that strictly lead to outcome change. You may be saying we want to do a training on a certain number of people on a certain topic, but also try to see, like analyze how this training has affected their knowledge, and try to see what outcome change has been achieved actually through a certain training. It's a certain like an appeal to you to also make sure that there are these activities within your projects that are not there simply to produce a certain output, but also to understand what change has been achieved. And it's not really often that we see these activities on projects that are proposed, not necessarily in the civil society sector, but in other sectors as well. When it comes then to the next topic that I wanted to cover in this session, partnership, it's important also to understand, I guess, the terminology of partnership that you will be seeing in these guidelines. We can also go back to them. Just for me to illustrate what I'm talking about, you will see that in these guidelines for applicants, there is a mention of co-applicants, and then there is a mention of associates, and then there is a mention of affiliated entities, and sometimes perhaps this could be, like not clear in terms of terminology. So lead applicants are the organizations that are submitting proposals, and these are the organizations that will be leading projects, so to speak. Informally, we usually use the term partners, project partners, to explain this term co-applicants, which is used in the guidelines. So co-applicants are your project partners. And then in the guidelines for applicants, you will see the mention of these affiliated entities as well. And then there is a clear explanation and an entire section of what these affiliated entities are. So there may be a possibilities that there are some affiliated entities on the project as well. And then there is also a mention of associates and contractors in section 213. So, like there may be some other organizations that are not necessarily partnering with you, but they want to involve them in your actions. As they say in the guidelines, other organizations or individuals may be involved in the action. So then these organizations will be the associates. Important for you to understand that this is a generic terminology that the European Commission uses when explaining partnership. So your partner organizations will be either co-beneficiaries or affiliated entities, and then there may be some associates that you will involve in the grant action as well. You will see on this slide a little bit more explanation as to what this all means. Grant beneficiaries, you will see in the guidelines and also in the contract, in the grant contract, that sometimes they're mentioning grant beneficiaries. When they say grant beneficiaries, they imply lead beneficiary and co-beneficiaries acting jointly. What's important to be aware of for the lead applicants, for those like lead beneficiaries, is that even though, of course, partnering organizations are partnering jointly and have so-called joint operational responsibility for the implementation of the project, financial responsibility mainly rests with the coordinator. Important issue also to consider if you're planning projects in partnership. It means, of course, it doesn't mean, of course, that you can't transfer certain funds to your project partners, but ultimately financial responsibility rests with the lead beneficiary. So have this in mind as well if you're planning projects that are in partnership. We prepared here a list of steps a list of elements, that could be important to go through when it comes to partnership management. Sometimes I see, I'm not saying that this is the case in that this is case here, but sometimes I see that organizations are presenting projects in partnership just because they think that will look good to whomever is evaluating. More partners the better. But if there is really no need for partnership, you don't need to apply in partnership. That's something, I guess, that's common sense, but it should be mentioned as well. If partnership, it doesn't really look meaningful on paper, it doesn't necessarily, it's not going to get you any more points, during the evaluation. Trust between partners, you see here in number 4 also important. Partnership arrangements, good communication, ways to conflict, to resolve conflict. Perhaps also important, number 2, signing memorandums of understanding. If you're entering into some kind of joint activity, it would be important also to perhaps draft a memorandum of understanding, even at this stage, even at the concept note stage. Technically, what's important for you to know is that if you now mention in your concept notes that a certain organization will be partnering with you, then it's not really easy to change this in the full application form. I've seen in the past that sometimes it happens that an organization gives up on partnership, or maybe someone was really overly optimistic when they listed partners at the concept node stage, and then when it comes to full application, these potential partners, they say, oh no, I really can't do it, I'm not interested any longer, and so on and so forth. It's not really easy to make such a change between the concept node and the full application form. So be careful when you are defining partners now at this stage. Expect that these will be the organizations that will have to partner with you in the full application form stage, and also during the implementation period. As you can see also on this particular slide, some tips for good partnership. Lack of good and timely communication among partners very likely to result in partnership failure, of course. I mean, if you're planning projects in partnership, then also take time to have some project boards, partnership meetings. It's really difficult now because of all this COVID situation, but online meetings at least, you know, once in 2 months or something like that, so that you're sure that that partnership is in place. But then to go back to the first topic of this session, it's not only about partnership, it's also about stakeholder management. So not a bad idea to also plan some kind of project advisory boards or any other way of stakeholder involvement. Sometimes we forget this when we're planning projects, and then we're surprised that organizations and institutions are not aware of us and of our good work. Well, they can't be if you don't involve them, if you don't invite them to a certain meeting, or at least send a newsletter to them or something similar to that. And then the third topic that I wanted to cover in this session, final beneficiaries and target groups. You will need to define them in your concept notes, of course, to describe their needs, to describe their constraints, and explain the relevance of your proposal to those needs and constraints, and to present any participatory process, ensuring their participation during this stage, during the preparation stage, but also in the implementation stage. Sometimes it's difficult to make to understand what's the difference between these two notions, target group, final beneficiaries. In some languages, final beneficiaries would be the people who ultimately benefit from the project. So that's the reason why sometimes people are having difficulties in understanding. But I mean, the definition is provided in the templates, so follow this definition. True target groups are groups who directly benefit from the action, and final beneficiaries are those who benefit from the action in the long term. I mean, as an example, from these two log frames which are presented, professionals undertaking and undergoing training would be the target group of the project, and then the overall population of children, for example, would be the final beneficiaries of that particular project, whose log frame we briefly looked into. Or if you remember the other log frame which I presented, participants undergoing the training for a certain job specific training would be the target group of the project, and then final beneficiaries would be, let's say, unemployed people as such. What's important for your concept notes is to try to quantify your target group as much as possible, so that whomever is reading your concept notes is aware that there will be 20 people trained, or there will be 10 civil society organizations receiving sub-grants, or there will be 48 organizations achieving a different kind of benefit. Because it gives a notion that you know what you're talking about, and that you've done your planning, and that you're certain as to what your project will achieve. Common sense matter again, but I wanted to mention this also. Your project proposals, your concept notes, of course, they could be, you know, like presented in the best possible way. You could have, you know, the best expert helping you develop them and use, you know, pictures and tables and be convincing. Totally. But if your project doesn't really help anyone, if there is no outcome change on the target group, if it doesn't help a living soul, then it's not going to be evaluated as a good project. So that's the most important thing, I guess, when it comes to concept note preparation, to define your target group and to be able to present what change is expected there as a result of your action for that target, for that particular target group. And then another, do you maybe have any questions as to all these things that we mentioned so far? No? Okay. Another important issue also that I wanted to mention during this session, sustainability. You can see on this visual what does it mean to be sustainable, you know. And then on the next couple of slides, I think on the next slide, there is a certain checklist for you that you could perhaps use while developing your concept notes. Certainly some issues that you know, assessors will look into when they're trying to understand whether your projects are sustainable. I will not read them, but they are there to just give you a little bit of more understanding as to what this sustainability is about. Of course, when we hear the word sustainability, it's usually related to environmentally friendly practices and preservation of environment, but it's not only about environment, as you can see on this slide, it's also about economic development and social development. So if you're working in partnership, please try to explain in your concept notes whether this is a long-term partnership, whether this is something that's coming up from past. So you worked with these organizations in the past, or you have intentions to continue working with these organizations in the future. If you're planning to purchase certain pieces of equipment or something similar, then if you're launching a service, for example, what happens after the project ends? It is really difficult to speak of these things with you know, a definite amount of certainty, but this is something that assessors will also be looking into when they're assessing projects. And I understand that you're now developing your concept notes. Projects may start in June 2001. Implementation will last for maybe a year or two. We're talking about, you know, year 2024. Of course, it's really difficult to be definite about what's going to happen after the project ends, but it's important for you also to understand how you see the benefits of this project and the services that were initiated, or perhaps some equipment that was purchased, how it will be in operation after the project ends. This is not really a short-term funding because projects can last quite long, and then it's expected also that you have an idea as to how these benefits will continue to be generated after the EU funding has ended for this particular action that you're submitting now. You will see also in the concept notes that you're presenting activities. There is a section in the concept note which speaks about action, design of the action. And this is why it's important to stress that action planning is activity planning is something that's ahead of you as well. You don't have to present the activity plan now in full detail. That's something that you will be presenting while working on the full application forms, but you're still expected to present at least the titles of activities and the substance of these activities, to say. So just another tip, don't forget that there are also activities that are of a cross-cutting nature, like management, monitoring, communication, reporting, stakeholder involvement. We mentioned this earlier, and have them within your action plans as well. Not only mentioning those activities that are like the substance of the project, which could be some analysis, policy analysis, training, or something like that. You will see that you're expected to report about your activities once you receive funds, and that you're expected to follow certain procurement rules as well. So study those times. It will take time to prepare reports. It will take time to prepare procurements. As I said, you're not really now expected to present an activity plan with all the timelines and everything else, but probably the best idea is to go back in, to the guidelines and then see what's the maximum duration for all lots. And you can see in lot 1, it can not lower than 6 months, not to exceed 36 months. For lot 2, not lower than 24 months, not to exceed 36 months. Of course, you should follow these rules fully. But then also, if something can be done in 6 months, you don't need to present a project that's going to last for 6 months. So try to be optimal. I'm not saying that you have to plan for 36 months in every single case, but try to be optimal and to understand that reporting also takes time. Based on our experience, organizations do indeed need a lot of time to prepare reports. You will be asked to present a report after each 12 months of your action. And then also bear in mind that if you're planning to procure some services or purchase some equipment, that this is going to take time as well. It's not going to be possible that you sign a grant contract and then you, in months, to procure all the things that need to be procured for the implementation of the action. This is not an issue that's of high importance now, but it's just something you're, as well as with the budget, you're now simply giving the indication of the duration of the action for your project, and then don't overpromise and don't plan, like durations that are simply not optimal. Yeah, and now we're entering into the session on budgeting. We're supposed to have a break before that. We can use the next 10 minutes for any questions that you could perhaps have that are related to these sessions that we covered. Nationality of the applicant matter. I mean, yes and no, to the extent that let's go back to guidelines once again. You will see that there is sorry, just let me find that section. You will see that for lot 1 and then also for lot 2, the applicant needs to be legally established in northern part of Cyprus. So, of course, you could have another nationality and still be legally established in the northern part of Cyprus. But I'm just drawing your attention to this particular requirement, this eligibility criteria. If you are a lead applicant, you need to be legally established in the northern part of Cyprus. Perhaps I misunderstood your question, or you wanted to ask something in addition. If yes, please do so. Of course, there was a question about there is a document with the concept node scoring criteria. Yeah, exactly. Again, I'm leading you through this document which is called Guidelines for Applicants, as mentioned like for a millionth time today. And yeah, you will see here on page 28 for the concept notes. For the concept notes evaluation, these are the questions that are asked. Relevance of the action, design of the action, maximum score for both quality criteria is 25. Maximum score for concept note is 15. And the threshold is 30. So you need to score more than 30, including 30, in order to pass to the full application stage. Just let me see. To be running before the application, you mean to be registered? There is no such a requirement. There is no such a requirement in this particular call. Sometimes there are calls published. Sometimes there are calls published where you know, there is a requirement that you need to be registered 1 year before the start of the call, or 2 years or something like that. Here there is no such requirement. But then also I think it's also fair to mention, let's go back to these guidelines, and just for you to understand, when full application forms are assessed, financial and operational capacity of the applicant is also assessed. So that's something to have in mind, you know, like if you registered today and you submitted a concept note tomorrow, it will be very difficult to pass this particular financial and operational capacity criteria unless you have some project management experience, technical in-house experience. And in particular, bear in mind this question 1.4, do you have stable and sufficient sources of finance? Of course, this doesn't mean that I'm now discouraging everyone who's, you know, recently registered to apply, but just bear in mind that financial and operational capacity is also assessed. It's not assessed now at the concept note stage, but it is assessed. It is assessed at later stage. Does it mean that anybody other than Turkish Cypriots can apply? No, not really. I mean, you can have, I presume, international organizations are also eligible to apply here. Let me mention that, I forgot about it. It means UN, perhaps, UN organizations or other international organizations. Co-applicants, they can be registered elsewhere. They don't need to be legally established in northern part of Cyprus. And it's not like that you have to be a Turkish Cypriot in order to apply. You may have a residence or something like that. Legally established doesn't mean that you need to have a certain nationality. I mean, I'm reading the questions. I don't know, you can also tell me if I forgot something, if I missed any question that was asked. I don't think so, but okay. If there are no questions for the time being, we will make a break. As mentioned in the beginning, we will have a half an hour break actually now. But in the meantime, if you think of any questions that you would like to ask, the meeting will remain open. I mean, Zoom will remain open, so you can use the chat and so on. And I will try to use this break to see what's happening and to upload these 2 documents, which I failed for 5 times during the previous session. And then let's see each other again in half an hour. Have a good break. Okay, great, thanks. There was just before we start with this next session, there was a question that I didn't answer. How about the initiatives? Is it required to have at least one Turkish Cypriot? I'm sorry, I'm not really sure that I understand the question, so perhaps whomever asked could just elaborate a little bit. What do you mean by initiatives? Okay, maybe the person still hasn't come back. If you're trying to answer, maybe you need to unmute.
So what I'm trying to understand is for lot one, individuals can apply, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so don't we call them initiatives? Like two people get together as an initiative. And
Okay, this is what you mean. No, I just wanted to clarify.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
you have to be established in Northern part. I'm just trying to make sure that, you know, there may be people who simply have residence in Northern part of Cyprus. They're not necessarily like Turkish Cypriots, but they are residents. And they're still established in Northern part of Cyprus. I mean, in terms of, you know, formally being established there. So I wouldn't say that there is such a requirement. Of course, I mean, at the end of the day, there will be mainly Turkish Cypriots, these individuals who are applying, but it's not a necessity. It's not a requirement of any, you know, like the formal requirement is to be established there, which means that you may also have simply a residence. You may be a citizen of, I don't know, some other place, and you may have a residence in northern part of Cyprus. So that, formally speaking, there is no such requirement, but of course, in reality, it will be the case that these are mainly Turkish Cypriots who are submitting proposals. But I mean, formally speaking, there's no such requirement. I don't know if this answers your question.
Yes, yes, thank you very much.
Okay. Well, also bear in mind, I mean, I remember it may not be related to you at all, and you know, like then just disregard whatever I'm saying, but I remember at the info session, some people also asked, you know, there could be like Turkish Cypriots, but living abroad, let's say currently living in France or whatever, and is that, you know, could they also submit a proposal? Just bear in mind that it's not only about being established in northern part of Cyprus, but according to guidelines, there is also a requirement that these activities need to take place. The project needs to take place in northern part of Cyprus, primarily. Of course, you may plan for a certain study tour or something like that. It could be a side activity that takes place elsewhere, but substantially, primarily, activities of the project need to take place there. So it doesn't seem feasible that someone who is, you know, not staying in northern part of Cyprus could actually be implementing activities there. So just drawing your attention to this fact that locality of the action is also defined. Okay, as I said even before, I mean, just repeating, if there are any questions that you think of, you can write them using this chat. We now have a topic of budgeting to discuss. To be clear from the, you know, in the very beginning, you're not required to submit full budget now. But it's not a bad idea. The same thing as I mentioned with log frames, it's not a bad idea to try to develop budget even at this stage. We are fortunate that you have really, you know, like a lot of time to prepare these concept notes. I'm not saying that this must be done. I'm not saying that it needs to be done at all costs, but it's not a bad idea to try to develop budget even at this stage. Currently, you'll be asked only when submitting a concept note, you'll be asked to give an indication of the budget requested. A figure, you know, like a certain amount of money you're requesting, a figure will be given, that's it.
It's really
but this is an estimate. It's an estimate only, and of course, I mean, you should not overpromise. You shouldn't be in the situation where you present a lot of activities and numerous activities, and you didn't even try to budget them to see what their costs.
Sorry to disturb you. Are you showing any diagrams at the moment, or are you just talking?
I want to show you the template for
Okay.
budget.
Because we're not seeing the screen.
Yeah, I'm trying to open it. Yeah, I don't know if you can see it now.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, I'll try to make it a little bit bigger if this is possible. As I said, I mean, disregard this template for the time being. You don't need to submit it, but then you also, I think, need to be familiar with it. And if possible, if you have time, not a bad idea to actually try to cost your activities and then have a more or less a clear understanding of how much money will it all cost. I'm just saying this in order for you not to overpromise in your concept notes. Sometimes people enter into the situation where they say, oh, we will do such and such numbers of trainings and so on. So many people will be trained, we will develop these studies, we will publish such and such number of papers and publications and what have you. And then when they actually start costing, you know, budgeting all these activities, they say, oh, it will actually be less. It will not be 10 trainings, but 5, because we don't really have enough money and so on. So not a bad idea to try to do the budgeting even now. I'm presenting to you the template for the budget. If your concept notes pass this evaluation, this assessment, and if you're invited to submit full application forms, then you will be asked to present and to prepare the full budget. For the time being, this is just for you to become familiar with how the template looks like. It's divided into sections. You can see human resources, travel, equipment and supplies, local office, direct eligible cost, and so on and so forth. So yeah, this is how the template looks like. There are 3 sheets. The first is a table budget, as you can see. The next one is justification sheet, so-called. This is the part where you're clarifying and justifying the cost, the nominal cost you presented in the sheet number 1. And then there is expected sources of funding, where you're expected to present what's the amount of money you're requesting from the European Commission and what's your co-financing. I'm now addressing some organizations that perhaps had applied before for the EU funding. There is a certain novelty now that we have in this particular call. There are 2 novelties. Individuals can apply, and then, I mean, CSOs without legal entity as well. And then also you can present volunteers' work as a cost. I'm just now saying this as an information for your organizations, because I presume lots of CSOs do indeed have volunteers working for them. It is now possible to present their work in the budget, and this is going to be your co-funding. It may be your co-funding. We will discuss this at later stage, but you will see that usually it's a case, and some organizations who applied before they know. But for sure, I mean, in most cases, EU funding comes as a co-funding arrangement where a certain percentage is provided by the European Union and a certain percentage is your own co-financing. And this is what you present in this sheet number 3 at the end of the day. But now 50% of this co-financing may be comprised of volunteers' work. So just for you to know that this is something to take into account. I presume that organizations sometimes have problems in finding this amount of money that they need for co-funding, and this could be a solution, at least partial solution, for this co-financing need, to present volunteers as well and their costs as a part of co-funding. This is something that I just wanted to share with you. It's a bit of a novelty. To understand budgeting as well, perhaps it would be also useful for you to read this section of the guidelines that's usually left unread by 98% of grant beneficiaries, because the wording is not so, interesting or easy to follow, but it's about eligibility of costs, and it's about what costs can be included in your budget. You will see there that there is a mention of actual costs and then simplified cost options. Again, I'm saying this is something that will be important for you when you start preparing your full application forms, of course, but just drawing your attention to this fact as well, that there is a possibility that you present your costs in a simplified cost option, and further on in the guidelines, you will see an explanation as to how this can be done. It could help you a little bit in financial management of the projects, because simplified cost option is meant to simplify financial management. This is why it's called simplified. More information can be found in certain annexes, and as I said, this is not really majorly important for the time being. Currently, you are only requested to present a nominal, indicative amount of money that you're requesting. But why not? I mean, to become familiar with these issues as well. There is a possibility that you can also plan for contingency reserve, unplanned costs, so to speak. They cannot exceed 5% of the direct eligible costs, and then there is a possibility to plan 7% of indirect costs. Indirect costs are the costs of the organization involved in which organizations, if they are partners, involved in the implementation of grant action, usually rent or operational costs such as electricity, and so on and so forth. And then you will also see a little bit of the explanation on the volunteers' work and the stuff that I mentioned, that it can comprise up to 50% of your co-financing, which may help you in securing funds for the co-financing. In the guidelines, you will also see that there is a list of ineligible costs. So these are the costs that you can't plan in your budgets, and just pay attention to these last two ineligible costs, which are specific for this particular call for proposal. And so if you're planning any infrastructural work where property rights have not been respected, then don't. Because you may even present them in your budget, but they will be deleted from your budget during the budget clearing. So important issues as well to become familiar with, even at this stage, because maybe you had planned for something, and then at the end you understand that this is either ineligible, or maybe you're thinking, oh, my organization doesn't really have enough funds to secure co-funding, but then you do maybe have volunteers, so you can present their costs as co-financing. These are some of the issues that's important that are important to be mentioned. You will see, yeah, this is, I already explained, just let me see that you can see, I already explained the terms that are used here. Please also study the simplified cost option, which I already mentioned. It could save some time and efforts in future financial management. For the time being, it's important just to study. When I briefly presented the budget template, you saw that it had a certain number of budget lines. I will just briefly explain these budget lines to you, so you can plan funds for human resources. These are the funds that are supposed to correspond to actual gross salaries within the organizations that are applying. Of course, it's not going to be possible to have this rule respected when it comes to individuals, but just for you to understand and to make sure, especially for the organizations that perhaps do not have so much experience in this, human resources salaries are presented in a way that they also include social security charges, so they're gross salaries. They should be those normally borne by the beneficiaries. So it means that if there are certain rule books within the organizations that are applying for funds now, that it can define maximum amounts or minimum or optimum amounts or reimbursements for the staff. These rule books, of course, should be presented. And in human resources section of the budget, we can go back to this section just for you to understand what I'm talking about. There are also sections relating to per diems for missions or travel. So if you're planning, for example, a study tour of some kind or something like that, this is the place where you will be presenting the costs associated with this study tour. Then the next budget heading, budget section, so to speak, deals with travel and local office, like you see here, travel, and then equipment and supplies. Travel is divided into international and local travel. I'm just giving these details for you for those organizations that decide perhaps to now prepare their budget, but then also for later stages. Just for you to be aware that usually in the budgets of the EC grants, we have a separation of international and local transportation. New or used equipment can be purchased. Please also bear in mind that according to the contract, grant contract that eventually could be signed with you, equipment which is purchased through grants needs to be transferred to final beneficiaries unless it is not presented differently in your concept notes and in your full application forms. So, I mean, typically, like an example would be if you're planning to purchase a certain number of laptops or something like that within your project, also make sure that if you want them to remain in your organizations, that this needs to be clearly mentioned in your project proposals and starting from concept notes. I mean, it will have to be elaborated in full application forms, but also in concept notes it can be explained. Project consumables could be, like material for trainings or workshops or something like that. All these costs, they can be presented in your budgets. They will be presented in local office section number 4. You can see here vehicle costs, office costs, consumables, other services, and so on and so forth. Bear in mind also, again, this is perhaps much more important for the full application form stages, but if you're planning to purchase certain equipment, certain types of equipment, there are also rules of origin. So look into that issue as well. You cannot easily buy equipment that doesn't originate from EU countries or European Economic Area countries. For example, like laptops made in China or something like that. You need to respect rules of origin as well. So in cases of some specific equipment, if you're planning to purchase that, keep this in mind. It's important to know this from the very beginning, I think. You will see again, to go back to the budget template, that there is then again a heading, like section of so-called other costs and services, and then what's presented here: publications, studies, evaluation costs, translation, financial services, visibility actions. In terms of expenditure verification, you don't need to plan these costs. As with previous grant schemes, expenditure verification is done independently. It's contracted independently by the contracting authority. So you can simply just basically forget about this cost when you start developing your budgets and when you finalize your budgets. Communication and visibility activities, don't forget them. They may be costly. You may mention in your concept note that you will have a campaign and then develop a website and then develop a social media campaign and so on and so forth. These things may cost. So then again, going back to this advice that I gave you, try to budget all your activities before you submit a concept note so that you're sure that you can do it, that you can fund all these activities. that you're proposing. Indirect costs, as I mentioned, 7% of the budget. This is a flat rate funding. So you can plan them as well. This could be a good source for the operational costs of the organizations that are applying to grants. There's no difference in terms of like individual applicants and organizations. So indirect costs can be planned as well by the in the cases of individual applicants. And then this slide gives you a little bit of more information as to what these indirect costs are. Most of these slides and this session as well is just to familiarize yourself with the expressions, with the terms, opportunities and possibilities, basically, so that you understand these guidelines a little bit more and these terms as well, because sometimes they may be, you know, like what are indirect costs, contingency and so on. Important issues, please bear in mind translation. There may be some translation costs. As I already mentioned in the very beginning of this session, in the very beginning of this workshop today, concept notes are submitted in English. The language of the call for proposals is English. Reports will be written in English. So you may need translation support to actually implement your grant, and then look into these issues as well. Also, you remember when we briefly touched upon partnership issues that I mentioned that there may be some organizations that are not co-beneficiaries, that are not co-applicants, associates, so-called associates, and you maybe are planning to involve them in the project. But then also, please understand that these associates, you cannot subcontract them or outsource them to deliver any services under the project. There were cases like some organizations proposing associates in the project proposals and then planning to have these associates actually deliver certain like trainings or services under the project. Is not possible. If you have associates under the project, they can only receive per diems and nothing else. So better not to mention them if you're not clear as to what funding arrangements are there in place.
Can I interrupt you, please? External
yeah, sure.
experts, BH5. What does BH5 mean?
Yeah. If you can see it here, other cost services. So, for example, let's go back to human resources. You're planning a project where certain number of external experts will be recruited to do an analysis, an assessment, verify something, deliver a training of some sort or something like that. So these people are not a part of your organization, so to speak.
Right. So
you're procuring their services from the market, let's say. I mean, they don't need to go into length into procurement rules, like procedures to use, but you're commissioning them to do a certain thing. So you will be presenting these experts, the costs of these experts in budget heading 5.
Thank you.
Important issue with these external experts also, the same kind of like rule applies if president of the board of the organization, if you're planning him or her to be commissioned to do certain services under the project, please make sure that their costs are not in budget heading 5, because that would be considered conflict of interest, commissioning services from oneself, you know, from your own resources. In those cases, present these costs in budget heading 1 in human resources. As I said, I mean, we'll discuss this at a later stage when full application forms are being developed, but I'm just giving you some important details now, because sometimes it happens, you know, that even at the concept note, we notice that an associate is identified in the concept note, but then again, it's mentioned that that associate is going to deliver certain services, and then this is a minus of some sort. You're not assessing the budget on the concept node level, but you're assessing the design. So some of these things could be traps in a way, threats. So you should be aware of them, I think. Contingency costs are also possible, just for you to know. They should be justified, of course, but with up to 5% of the total eligible cost, they can be planned for contingency. So if you're uncertain that, like maybe you budgeted something, but you're thinking, oh, maybe equipment cost will change, or maybe these experts may cost more, or something like that, there's always a possibility to plan for 5% contingency costs. And then we have a list, as I mentioned earlier, we have a list of ineligible costs. So don't plan any action which includes any of these costs, even at this stage. If you're planning to purchase buildings or offices, this is really not a call for proposal for you. There may be something else. If this is your core activity, it clearly says it's ineligible costs. So don't plan anything like that. Important thing to mention, sometimes it's taken for granted, maybe there were some costs prior to the signature of the contract. We mentioned now early as we can expect that your contract can start in June 2021. So maybe you're planning a joint project where something will be co-financed by different actors, but then maybe, let's say, an American embassy is funding a part of your action, and then you're thinking, okay, I will present their costs as my co-funding to this particular action, but then their funding will stop by end of this year. You will not be able to claim these costs as eligible by June 2021. So anything happening before the signature of the contract, that's considered ineligible. Also, bear in mind salary costs, reimbursing them, paying personnel of local bodies is not eligible. So if you're planning to have a project coordinator from a certain institution, which is a local body in northern part of Cyprus, also, give up from these ideas, even at this stage, because it's clearly written in the guidelines that these costs are not eligible. And then, as I said, there are these two specific types of ineligible costs that are also important to follow. So if you're planning any infrastructural works and you're not sure that property rights are fully respected, they're better not than to plan such activities within this particular call for proposal, or ensure that everything is in line with what's written in this slide. There are some important issues, as I mentioned earlier in the very beginning of the workshop. If you're planning sub-granting, the so-called financial support to third parties, if you remember when we discussed about it, I mentioned clearly it's not an advantage, it's not a benefit. It doesn't need to be planned in block 2 actions, but nevertheless, if some organizations decide to do it, there are ceilings there. A sub-grant cannot be higher than 10,000 euros, and total amount of money that can be sub-granted, so to speak, is 60,000 euros. And then there are also some other ceilings that are mentioned in the call that you need to look into, even at this stage. Infrastructural works, if anything is planned in that regard, going back to ineligible costs here as well, it has to be respected, but nevertheless, they can be up to 10% of total budget. And if you're planning to purchase any equipment costs ceiling for equipment cost is up to 20% of the budget. I don't want to over-repeat myself. I told you already a couple of times, the budget doesn't need to be developed now, but it will be clear even at the concept node stages that if you're mentioning that you want to do a lot of equipment purchase, that this doesn't fit in because the ceiling is 20%. So look into these issues as well. I think that someone wanted to ask something.
Yes, please. Infrastructural works. This is to physical property, or could it be a computer program?
No, infrastructural works, it means engineering works. Engineering works.
Understood. All right, thank you.
It's
But
not,
software would not come under that definition.
yeah, for sure, but no, I mean software
Okay.
development. We are talking about how they say immovable properties
Immovable
here.
property.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you,
mean,
ma'am, very much.
software is, I guess, movable property. Yeah, so software development, I mean, there are no issues there. And maybe you need to buy some equipment that's related to the software development, then again, up to 20%. But in terms of services required to do a certain software, develop a certain software or something like that, there are no ceilings in terms of percentage of the budget. And then some final remarks related to the budget. The first sentence we already mentioned, I will not repeat. Don't overpromise, as I said, and as a reminder, and also going back to the guidelines, which I recommended to you to study in great detail. There are certain maximums of the EU grants, or the EU grants that you can request. I will open the guidelines also, so for you to know where this part can be found. It's more or less the same information, but you know, for future, if you're studying some other guidelines, you will see here that any grant requested under Lot 1 must fall between 30,000 euros and 60,000 euros. But bear in mind one thing, this is EU funding requested. Let's go back to the budget and to this sheet 3, which I mentioned to you. So in your project, there will be a certain amount of money that you're requesting from the European Union, and then there will be a certain amount of money that you are providing as your own co-funding. Altogether, this is your project budget, and this 70,000 euros will be presented in the table budget. But whenever someone mentions EU grant, they're talking about the 60,000 euros. So perhaps I'm overcomplicating things, but I just want to say that this doesn't mean that your maximum budget has to be 60,000 euros. If you are a Lot 1 applicant, no, it means that EU grant, the funds that you're requesting from EU, have to be up to maximum of 60,000 euros, and then on top of that, there will be your co-funding as well. There are rules for co-financing. It's 5% of the total eligible costs of the action at minimum. I mean, the guidelines are presenting it in a different way, but you need to contribute with 5% of the total eligible costs. And for some reason, European Commission also has the rules for the maximum co-financing amount. It can go up to 40,000. So if there are organizations who significantly want to financially contribute to the grant actions, for them also to be aware that the ceiling there is 40%. I mean, your co-financing can be 40%, or I mean, minimally EU can co-fund your project with 60%. When it comes to grant, Lot 2, it's a little bit different. Nominally, it's 75,000 euros in minimum terms of the EU grant. Let me mention this again, and then 320,000 maximum. Also, always in the guidelines, you can see what's the allocation for what lot. We have 2 lots here. So altogether, European Union is planning to distribute around 400,000 euros for Lot 1 altogether, and then around 1,600,000 euros for Lot 2. This doesn't have to be the case at the end of the day. There may be some better proposals from some other lots. You know, it could be that reallocation of these funds in between the lots happens, but this is an indication for you of their intentions.